Thank you. The Subcommittee on Europe of the House Foreign Affairs Committee will come to order. The Chair would like to remind our guests today that demonstrations from the audience, including the use of signs and placards, as well as verbal outbursts, are a violation of the rules of the House. The purpose of this hearing is to discuss the situation for ethnic Armenians who remain in Nagorno-Karabakh and those who have fled as refugees, as well as hear from the administration on the status of peace negotiations between Armenia and Azerbaijan. I would also like to welcome the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly, and the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Schneider, who are joining us today. They will participate following all other members in today's hearing. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. In recent history, Nagorno-Karabakh has seen the first Nagorno-Karabakh War in the 1990s and the second Nagorno-Karabakh War in 2020. These wars collectively killed thousands of soldiers and displaced upwards of 1 million people. Ahead of Azerbaijan's September assault on Nagorno-Karabakh impeded access of humanitarian assistance through the Lachen corridor, ushered in a devastating crisis for ethnic Armenians. Following Azerbaijan's decision to retake Nagorno-Karabakh by deadly force, a mass exodus of over 100,000 ethnic Armenians fled into Armenia. These people are now destitute and are wholly dependent on international humanitarian aid. Despite Azerbaijan's assurance to reintegrate the ethnic Armenians in a way that fully respects their rights, the lack of trust on both sides will make this exceedingly difficult. I want to say publicly here that the U.S. Congress will be watching Azerbaijan closely to ensure that it upholds its obligations to respect the human rights and the fundamental freedoms of the residents of Nagorno-Karabakh. What matters most now is where we go from here. We need to appeal for a lasting peace, which will afford the people of Armenia and Azerbaijan a better life. I want to understand how this administration is working with the international community to bring Armenia and Azerbaijan to the negotiating table. I also hope that our witnesses will address how the administration is working to ensure such a comprehensive peace will deal a blow to Russian malign influence and the growing Russia and Iran nexus that seeks to exploit the South Caucasus. With over 100,000 ethnic Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh now living as refugees in Armenia, we cannot afford to look away from the region or be distracted by other conflicts proliferating across the globe. I was encouraged to hear Administrator Power's announcement of $11.5 million in assistance following the September 19th escalation. And I will ask the witnesses to detail how this aid is being put to use to address urgent humanitarian needs of the ethnic Armenians that fled to Armenia, as well as those few that remain in and around Nagorno-Karabakh. Most importantly, I also want to understand what message the Biden administration is sending to President Aliyev about refraining from any further use of deadly force. I was extremely disappointed that Baku abandoned the active diplomatic efforts to settle the Nagorno-Karabakh issue and instead chose to retake the region by force. This only exacerbated the lack of trust between both sides. I hope our witnesses today will explain how they are communicating to President Aliyev and that the use of force against sovereign Armenian territory, including in the Sunak province, would be completely and totally unacceptable. It is my hope that one day the region will see true, lasting peace, free from Russian and Iranian malign influence. That is what the people of these two countries deserve. I thank our witnesses for being here today, and we look forward to your testimony. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Keating, who is the ranking member of this committee. Mr. Keating.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to ask unanimous consent that Representative Dean be allowed 1 minute because she helped facilitate the change of time here this morning.
Certainly.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding today's important hearing on the future of Nagorno-Karabakh, a region ripe with history and culture. Today, the Caucasus region is a vibrant, geopolitically strategic region of the world representing the crossroads of Europe and Asia. Yet for decades, the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan over ethnic Armenian enclave Nagorno-Karabakh has left thousands of people dead, missing, and displaced. In September of 2020, renewed fighting between Armenia and Azerbaijan left 6,900 killed or missing in action, including 4,000 from Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh. By the end of 2021, 40,000 had remained displaced in Armenia. A ceasefire in November 2020 left the status of Nagorno-Karabakh unresolved, but importantly, paused for 44 days of conflict between the two countries. In the time since the 2020 ceasefire, and amid repeated escalations, senior officials from Armenia and Azerbaijan have met repeatedly, including multiple times in Washington, hosted by the State Department, to talk in specificity about the prospects for peace, the challenges facing the countries, and the sensitivity of the issues which remain unresolved. Through these meetings and similar rounds of talks hosted by the European Union and by bilateral initiatives regularly were undertaken by both countries, steady progress was made on such issues as deciding the border issues, missing persons, and mutual recognition of sovereignty and territorial integrity. While aspects of a comprehensive peace agreement are sensitive for both sides, I believe issues like the protection of the rights of ethnic Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh, as well as the passage of all goods and services through the Lachin corridor, remain necessary components of a comprehensive peace deal that will ensure a safe and dignified return for Armenians to Nagorno-Karabakh should they seek it. While months of diplomatic talks had led to significant progress in the face of immense personal and political risks undertaken by, in particular, our Armenian Prime Minister Pashinyan, in September of 2023, Azerbaijan President Aliyev decided to break with the internationally accepted and lawful diplomatic path, instead opting for the use of military force in Nagorno-Karabakh. As a result of Azerbaijan's unacceptable military action, over 100,000 ethnic Armenians have fled Nagorno-Karabakh, resettling in Armenia and leaving their personal belongings and their livelihoods behind them. I strongly believe we must provide humanitarian and economic assistance to displaced people in Armenia and ensure accountability for any potential crimes committed against those fleeing Nagorno-Karabakh or those who are choosing to remain there. I also know our State Department colleagues, understandably, are actively reviewing the waiver provided by Section 907 of the Freedom Support Act, and I look forward to a determination on this issue. While these issues should be resolved first, it's not too early to look at the future and a potential comprehensive peace settlement. Importantly, any resolution to this issue must be made diplomatically and peacefully. Military action is simply unacceptable. It's been encouraging that just recently both sides have expressed a willingness to continue negotiations, something I strongly support as long as they're undertaken in good faith and good conscience. While Armenia and Azerbaijan need to be getting back to the table, Russia and other outside actors who seek to undermine and influence negotiations must be put at bay. It's vital that the U.S. and Europe lead these negotiations to ensure the values we espouse as democracies are represented and the people impacted by these conflicts, as well as those who would benefit from a dignified peace agreement. At the same time, with transatlantic alliances united in support of Ukraine, there's no better opportunity for the people of the region to reap the economic benefits of a peace deal than there is today. This includes respect for human and civil rights for all people, including those who choose to remain in Nagorno-Karabakh. This also includes Azerbaijani citizens, such as Dr. Gubad Ibadoglu, a renowned economist and academic who remains in Azerbaijan prison cells. Dr. Ibadoglu's rights must be respected, and I will continue to call to ensure he receives a fair trial, food, and medicine. We sit here today at an inflection point in these decades-long conflict, and I strongly believe a comprehensive diplomatic peace agreement will benefit the people of the region and the region as a whole. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. King. We now yield to the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, Representative Dean.
I thank you, Chairman Kean, Ranking Member Meeks, for holding this important and timely hearing and for allowing me just brief remarks. I was happy to be any small part of putting this meeting together. I commend the administration for its consistent engagement in Azerbaijan and Armenia on the issue of Nagorno-Karabakh. As we all know, the conflict ultimately unfortunately has escalated. What started as a blockade of Nagorno-Karabakh culminated in the Azerbaijani offensive on September 19 and 20 to regain control of the region. Within 10 days, approximately 100,000 residents of Nagorno-Karabakh, about 80% of the population, fled to Armenia. Armenia, the U.S., EU, and international organizations have stepped in to provide humanitarian assistance for the refugees, but many questions remain as to their future, as well as the future of Nagorno-Karabakh. I want to just briefly say thank you to our witnesses. Thank you for your expertise and your service, Ambassador O'Brien and Dr. Sokolowski. Thank you for being with us today. I look forward to hearing your testimony and this discussion about how we can work together to secure a stable, prosperous future for the region. Thank you. I yield back.
Other members of the subcommittee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We are pleased to have a distinguished panel of witnesses before us today on this important topic. Ambassador James O'Brien is Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of European and Eurasian Affairs at the Department of State. Dr. Alexander Sokolowski is a Deputy Assistant Administrator in the Bureau for Europe and Eurasia in the U.S. Agency for International Development. Thank you both for being here today. Your full statements will be made part of the record, and I'll ask each of you to keep your verbal remarks to 5 minutes in order to allow time for member questions. I now recognize Ambassador O'Brien for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Keating, Representative Dean. I think your opening statements have set the context very well. So I'll try to focus my remarks on 3 elements: how we're caring for the people who were uprooted in September, how we are supporting Armenia, and how we are working toward a peace. And I know Dr. Sokolowski will have much to say on the specifics of our assistance toward all 3 goals. This is the legacy of Soviet and Russian involvement in the region, and we have to deal with the consequences of good information so that they can make a real choice about their future and know that they have the viable opportunity to return and live well in Nagorno-Karabakh if that's what they choose. I'm encouraged that the UN and ICRC report that they have unimpeded, unrestricted access to Nagorno-Karabakh to verify conditions in the ground, and we're working to be sure that they are able to speak with the refugees inside Armenia so that there's clear and reliable information available to them. So there are 2 things we're doing. One is we want them to have a viable choice, to have the information and the rights they need to make decisions for themselves. As you mentioned, we have already committed substantial money since September 19th to make this possible. I met on Friday with Prime Minister Pashinyan to discuss other steps that we might take to support the refugees and assist the government of Armenia with helping them in their current situation and with whatever choices they might make. And I know Dr. Sokolowski will have more to say about this. I also want to assure the committee that we are developing at the Secretary's order a comprehensive, thorough, and transparent record of what happened, not just on those days, but for the months before. We've commissioned independent investigators. We have our own investigators working in the field. There's information available from international NGOs and other investigators. And as we develop the record of what happened, we will be completely open about what we are finding. I can't put a timeline on this investigation, but we will keep you informed as we go forward. And I'm happy to say more about this. The second thing we are working on is support for Armenia. I've been fortunate to work on issues in Armenia over the last couple of years in my role as the sanctions coordinator at the State Department. I'm very impressed by the government's commitment to reform and to diversifying the relationships that it has, economic, political, energy, and security, particularly in the transatlantic community. And I think we owe it to the people of Armenia to help them through this difficult situation so that those choices they've made very bravely are able to help them have a more secure, stable, and prosperous future. So we're working closely with the European Union on providing an offer of support for Armenia over the next months. When I met with the Prime Minister on Friday, this was the main topic of our conversation, and I think it's critical to a secure, free, and prosperous region that we be supportive of the Armenian people and of the government and the choices that they've made. Third, we are pursuing a peace agreement. The sides have met multiple times. I saw the European Union mediators just this week, spoke with others this morning. They are hosting one of the parties today. The next few weeks will be critical in testing the parties' willingness to go from good intentions to saying yes. Because as we all know, yes is the hardest word to get in a negotiation. So how are we doing that? Well, we are deeply engaged. I think there have been 13 senior-level visits to the capitals, Yerevan and Baku, since September, as well as, and meetings among the parties as well. We're also deeply engaged with our Turkish colleagues as we go forward. We've made clear that nothing will be normal with Azerbaijan after the events of September 19th until we see progress on the peace track. So we've canceled a number of high-level visits, condemned the actions, and you mentioned, Representative Keating, the 907 waiver. We don't anticipate submitting a waiver until such time as we see a real improvement in the situation. All of this is to say we continue to urge peace. Now, why would they make peace now and not before? I think you each pointed to a couple of key elements. One of them is the economic benefit of peace. Central Asian countries are looking for new routes to get their goods to market. Those routes can run through Azerbaijan on to Georgia or down through Armenia to Turkey. We've said no use of force is acceptable. A transit corridor built with the involvement and consent of Armenia can be a tremendous boon to states across the region and to global markets who will receive access to these goods. A transit corridor created some other way, by force or with involvement of Iran, will, I think, be met with a very strong reaction and will not be a success. That's a simple choice. The other piece I think you've all touched on as well, it's the choice of what political relationships these states want to have in the future. A future that is built around an axis of Russia and Iran as the main participants in security in the region, I think is unstable and undesirable, including for both the governments of Azerbaijan and Armenia. They have the opportunity to make a different decision now, and we're clarifying that. And I anticipate we'll have more senior-level involvement over the weeks to come.
Thank you,
With
Ambassador
that,
Bryan.
I appreciate the time.
And now I recognize Dr. Sokolowski for his opening statement.
Thank you. Chairman Kean, Ranking Member Keating, distinguished members of the Subcommittee on Europe, thank you for your invitation to speak today.
Can you bring your microphone a little closer,
Oh,
please?
sure. Can you hear me better now? Okay, great. Thank you for your invitation to speak today on USAID's work in the South Caucasus and your support, particularly concerning the humanitarian situation surrounding the crisis in Nagorno-Karabakh and Armenia. I welcome the opportunity both to talk about our work in the region and to hear your perspectives. USAID and our interagency partners have been working diligently to respond to the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh. For months, humanitarian conditions in the territory steadily deteriorated due to the blockage of the Lachin corridor, resulting in critical shortages of food, energy supplies, medical commodities, and other essential goods. Humanitarian conditions in Nagorno-Karabakh further worsened after armed clashes erupted on September 19th. This prompted more than 100,000 people, nearly all of the ethnic Armenians in the territory, to flee Nagorno-Karabakh in less than 2 weeks. Many of these displaced people exhibited symptoms of sustained emotional distress and chronic illness as a result of Azerbaijan's blockage of the Lachin corridor. 4 days after Azerbaijan's military action, USAID Administrator Samantha Power traveled to Armenia to express USAID's support for Armenia and for the people of Nagorno-Karabakh, and to oversee U.S. efforts to respond to the immediate needs of the ethnic Armenians fleeing the territory. Administrator Power met with Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan and underscored USAID's commitment to support the Armenian government in assisting displaced persons arriving in Armenia. The administrator traveled to Armenia's border, with Azerbaijan to speak firsthand to ethnic Armenians fleeing Nagorno-Karabakh and with humanitarian organizations working to support the tens of thousands of people arriving each day. Administrator Power also announced the activation of a disaster assistance response team to identify priority response needs and to work with humanitarian partners to provide urgently needed aid. Administrator Power then traveled to Azerbaijan, where she met with President Ilham Aliyev to express the United States' deep concerns with Azerbaijan's use of force in Nagorno-Karabakh and to press the Azerbaijani government to allow humanitarian access to the territory, to protect Armenian religious and cultural sites, and to take clear steps to give ethnic Armenians the confidence to return safely. Assistant Secretary O'Brien already noted the $11.5 million in assistance announced on September 26th. And additionally, USAID has focused nearly $6 million in funding from existing programming at USAID Armenia to respond to the humanitarian crisis. This assistance provides immediate food, hygiene, shelter materials, child protection, and support to local governments and communities where the new arrivals have come to. Last month, USAID's Assistant Administrator for Europe and Eurasia, Ambassador Erin McKee, traveled to the Caucasus to receive updates on the situation and to communicate our ongoing commitment to the displaced people of Nagorno-Karabakh. In early October, I also traveled to Armenia to meet with those who had left Nagorno-Karabakh, to consult with Armenian government officials on how we could cooperate further, and to assess USAID's ongoing response efforts. One key takeaway from my trip was the sincere appreciation that displaced persons had for the government of Armenia and the positive assessments of its response so far. As one woman put it to me, we felt alone during the blockage of the Lachen Road, but now we feel that Armenia has welcomed us. In addition to our response to the crisis, USAID has been increasing longer-term development support to Armenia to strengthen Armenia's economic resilience, improve public service provision, and consolidate democratic reforms. In recent weeks, we have deployed teams to Yerevan to explore ways of helping Armenia become more resilient over the longer term, particularly in the governance and in the energy spheres. Thanks to generous support from Congress, USAID has increased its assistance to Armenia by more than 50% since fiscal year 2018. This funding has allowed us to work with the government of Armenia, civil society organizations, and help Armenia foster economic growth, strengthen civic engagement, help diversify its energy supply, and support a more pluralistic, reliable information environment. USAID is also helping Armenia to build economic and trade linkages with Western partners and to increase economic opportunities for women and young people. Lastly, USAID remains committed to promoting peace, stability, and prosperity across the South Caucasus. To that end, we've recently launched regional programs focusing on goals common to all three countries in the region, specifically rural development and natural resources management. Through these cross-border programs, USAID seeks to build partnerships that create the basis for shared prosperity, improved livelihoods, and peace. Thank you again for the opportunity to discuss USAID's priorities and efforts. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Sokolowski. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, the U.S. must send a clear message to President Aliyev that the use of force against sovereign Armenian territory, including the province of Sunak, would be completely unacceptable. Ambassador O'Brien, what measures is the administration prepared to use to deter such move by Baku? Is the decision to forego, as you alluded to in your opening comments, a Section 907 waiver for Azerbaijan part of that effort, and what else? What other measures are you taking?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we have signaled repeatedly, Ambassador Power, communications from the Secretary, every high-level contact we've had, that the use of force inside Armenia is completely unacceptable. The authorities in Baku have assured us they have no such intention, and we're monitoring very closely the movement of troops and any indication that they might have plans otherwise. As I indicated, we've told them that there's no chance of business as usual as long as the peace agreement goes unconcluded. So what steps do we take with that? It's two things. One is we have canceled a number of senior level engagements. We do not anticipate submitting a waiver on 907, which enables us to provide some assistance to Azerbaijan. And it is assistance that's meaningful both to them and to us. So this has some effect. And we are noting that the possibility of building a transit corridor hinges on the conclusion of a peace agreement and an agreement with Armenia on working consensually to develop that. So we're putting forth all the elements that we see as important in the relationship in order to see whether we can get a peace agreement concluded now.
Thank you. Ambassador O'Brien, in your written testimony, you said that the State Department is supporting efforts to interview those who fled Nagorno-Karabakh to learn more about what they experienced. What has the State Department learned from these interviews about the living conditions of ethnic Armenians and their treatment during Azerbaijan's offensive?
So I don't want to get in front of the conclusions, and I want to maybe offer a little context. My background, I began as a young State Department lawyer where I was one of the informal group at the time to investigate the activities in Bosnia where the phrase ethnic cleansing first came to international attention. This takes some time because we're dealing with a population that had been under enormous stress in the months leading up to the events of September 19th and has been through an extraordinarily difficult time. So we're just beginning to speak with the residents, and it's not just us. We're also, there are other groups that are actively involved. We want to be sure that we're not re-interviewing the same people in a way that it causes them further trauma. So this coordinating effort's taken some time. What we're learning is there was a period of a condition of fear due to the closure of the Lachin corridor in the run-up. That's no surprise to anyone. And so that when Azeri authorities came in forcibly on September 19th, it caused the residents to want to leave. Now, exactly what activities took place where, under what command and control, and how that was conveyed to the residents, these are all subjects we're seeking to learn. And again, it's not just government officials doing this. We know there has been a report published by Human Rights Watch. The International Crisis Group is publishing results of its interviews. We also anticipate that the Helsinki committees from Norway and Poland will have their own independent reviews. All of those things will coordinate or we will bring together in a report that we think will give us a true picture. But it does take some time as we deal with a population that is still itself analyzing what has happened to it.
And Dr. Sokolowski, what more does the international community need to be doing to address the urgent needs of ethnic Armenian refugees now in Armenia?
Sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for that question. If I could start, partly respond a little bit to the previous question, because USAID has sent the Bureau for Europe and Eurasia's leading expert on human rights for the region to Armenia to work with our mission on developing an additional programmatic effort that would seek to gather testimony from those who have come from Nagorno-Karabakh to Armenia. And we are, of course, coordinating closely with many of the groups that my colleague had mentioned, including the State Department and non-governmental organizations. I would just concur with what he said with regard to this takes time and we want to make sure that we do it right, but we are definitely focusing on that issue. With regard to the second question in terms of understanding the need and if we are meeting the need, I would start with two things. First, we are engaged in a broad and deep conversation with the government of Armenia, particularly with the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs, which is the lead agency for responding to the new arrivals from Nagorno-Karabakh, to make sure that the needs are being met. And we are helping them and working with them to see what their needs are and responding appropriately. Of course, they are signaling to us areas where they see additional areas for need, and we're in that conversation with them right now. Secondly, I would emphasize the point I made in my testimony that they are receiving strong marks so far. I think many had thought that we were not going to receive this many displaced persons this quickly, but the government of Armenia, I think, showed itself to have shown some foresight and preparation and has been handling it well. However, yes, especially as we go from the medium to the longer term, there's going to have to be some effort made to help integrate these folks into Armenian life. And from my conversations with them, I will end with this. Many of them dream of going back to Nagorno-Karabakh, but for right now, they are oriented towards making a life in Armenia, and the government of Armenia is poised to help them do that.
Thank you. And I now recognize Ranking Member Keating for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador O'Brien, you mentioned, the mutual interest in economic prosperity and stability in the region, and you mentioned U.S. interest and European interest as well. One of those areas, there's reports that have indicated that Russia has been using its influence with the post-Soviet states in the region to circumvent U.S. and European sanctions in aid of their war effort in Ukraine. How's the U.S. working with the countries affected, including Armenia, to try and deal with this issue?
It's a great question, Representative. So just to focus on Armenia, the government itself has undertaken some very interesting reforms that allow it to track trade with Russia. So in almost real time, they can see which firms are involved in this circumvention trade, and then we're able to take measures to stop that trade. It works remarkably well. We just hosted a technical group here in my old office about 2 weeks ago, and the recent statistics are very encouraging. We can verify these through our own sources. The one hole is that as a result of the 2020 ceasefire, so that was signed under the previous administration, the Russian troops actually control 2 key border crossings from Armenia to Russia. One is at the airport and another land crossing into Azerbaijan. So the government has no control over the goods that flow through those items. It just makes even more urgent the point you made in your statement that we need to find a more stable way for Armenia to govern itself and to have the Russian peacekeepers leave when their 5-year term is up in another year and a half. We can do that only if we are deeply engaged in the terms of the peace agreement that emerge. If we stay out, then Russia continues to control the border.
Yeah, thank you for that. My involvement, and I want to really congratulate our State Department with everything going on in the world. Your efforts to focus on this are critical. I think we were at the cusp of an historic peace agreement, something that people never thought could happen. I looked at Northern Ireland and Ireland years ago when people said the divisions are so deep there can be no peace. And the Good Friday Agreement proved that there can be. I viewed this in the same light. And at times of critical historic achievement in terms of peace, leaders have to step forward. I think that, Prime Minister Pashinyan has taken a great deal of criticism, but has stepped forward. And I think he deserves enormous credit for realizing long-term benefits to his country. And I look to President Aliyev, because you referenced him in your discussions initially. How would you categorize their role, their importance, and where we are with those leaders? Because historic change happens through courageous leadership of people in those countries, willing to take internal criticism to do the most beneficial outcomes for their own country. So could you take a few minutes and talk about how do you characterize their roles in the importance of their moving forward on this?
Thank you for this, and I think it's the right focus. And also thank you for the kind words to the State Department. I'm the new guy on this beat, but the team from the Secretary, who's had 3 meetings with the parties, to Lou Bono, the Special Representative, who's had multiple meetings, Ambassador Yuri Kim, who's traveled out, Ambassador Power. The team has been, I think, very creative and diligent in pursuing this. But it all ultimately turns on what the 2 governments decide and whether the leaders are willing to say yes. And that is by far the most difficult thing to say. Prime Minister Pashinyan has made clear that he wants Armenia to have a transatlantic opportunity and he's diversifying the relationships that Armenia depends upon so that the people there are able to choose a future that fits their visions of freedom. He seems willing to take chances for peace. The question really is whether President Aliyev is willing to do that, and he has said he is. So now is the moment, because the challenge always for a power that feels stronger, and I think it's fair to say Azerbaijan feels that it has the oil and gas revenues, the relationships, the ability to have some options. The challenge is always when it's time to cash the options in and commit to one path for the future. So how do we do that? We're talking a lot with Turkey, which has very close relations with the government in Azerbaijan, and we're trying to lay out a path that makes clear the benefits that come from peace and the costs that come with choosing to wait further. And really, the decision will be his on whether he says yes or not, and we want that to happen in the next few weeks. All signs are they're willing to consider it, but getting to yes is always a difficult matter, as you know from your work in the Congress.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Keating. I now recognize the Vice Chair of the Europe Subcommittee, Mr. Self from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of comments on your testimonies, both written and verbal. The cannot be business as usual in our bilateral relationship. I will tell you, we hear the same language out of the State Department when it comes to Qatar hosting the Hamas leadership, and yet I see no difference in the behavior toward Qatar. I think that this is another attempt to pull a nation out of the Russian orbit, Armenia specifically. And it's, I wish you success, but Serbia, you're having less success, so I'll just make that comment. And also the recent pipeline, you talked about a route across Armenia. The recent pipeline from Azerbaijan to Turkey bypassed Armenia completely. So it will take a change in approach by both Azerbaijan and Armenia in order to make any route across Armenia. So now, getting to the question, you have not had a Section 907 waiver for the first time in 20 years or so. First of all, two questions for you, Ambassador. The first one is, what is the impact on our national security goals? Obviously, countering Iranian smuggling operations. This is a very dangerous part of the world. That's the first one. And second, I would like your opinion on the perspective question of, as the weak administration policy in this part of the world, did Azerbaijan see this as necessary to take this action in order to get the U.S. to focus on this? Because this, because your lack of a waiver happened before the September action. So do you think that Azerbaijan took this action in order to force you to focus on this issue? Because obviously the waiver is important to them. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I'd say no. The Azerbaijanis have never indicated as much to us. There's no sign in any contextual information that suggests so. What they have said is that this is a 30-year conflict, and they saw an opportunity to end it on terms they thought were favorable to them. And we've said that there was a peaceful process to do so, and they told us they were committed to it, and then ultimately were not. And that's why we've taken
That's
the
my
steps
question,
we have.
Ambassador. Why the change?
They
They were committed to it, and just seeing an opportunity in a 30-year conflict seems to belie the statement.
No, I think that suggests that this was simply unrelated to any other events. I don't think that's the case. I think what they saw was the continued violence and risk of violence in the area, and now they had the edge to be able to do something about it. That's independent of their signaling to us. And I just have to say, for as important as this issue has been to Azerbaijani politics for 30 years, the idea that a waiver, which is an important, and I'll address the other question, the waiver is important for addressing sort of very narrow, specific issues. We feel comfortable that there is no damage to our national security right now, but the idea that they would decide an issue that is of fundamental importance to them based upon this slightly different marginal issue just to get our attention, when they had our attention, I don't quite see that that narrative hangs together.
Okay, but then in my limited time, then what was the trigger? Simply the continued violence? Because I don't see that as a sufficient trigger to use military action when they're so close
Yeah,
to resolution.
my guess is historians are going to argue about why this week rather than another week for a long time, and I don't think we'll settle it in our limited time. But I think what you're looking at more is a discussion about what the future of the region is and how much it's oriented toward the Black Sea and the transatlantic. And they saw this as an issue that they now had the ability to do something about, and so they did it. And now we are trying to deal with the consequences of that in a way that, as you say, weans the states away from the Russian orbit.
Yeah. Thank you. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. I now recognize Ms. Titus from Nevada for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both for being here. I'd like to ask Secretary O'Brien if you would talk some more about Turkey. You mentioned it a couple of times and that we're engaging with Turkey more, but I'd like to hear some more detail about that. We're all familiar with the kind of fraught history between Turkey and Armenia, and we've only just recently, in 2021, recognized officially the genocide. It was at that time the Library of Congress actually started using that term in relation to Turkey and Armenia. In the meantime, Turkey and Azerbaijan have been pretty cozy over the years. So what role will Turkey play in some peace relations? And also, what kind of damage are they causing now? Is there in-use monitoring of weapons that we sell to Turkey or that Turkey gets from us that they may then be using in helping Azerbaijan?
I think on the last question, Representative, we do have careful end-use requirements and monitoring. I have never seen an indication of any illegitimate transfer. I'm happy to review that and get back to you. But are you suggesting that you have seen indications of that?
It's just an open question.
Yeah, so that is as a matter of practice we're very careful about, and particularly with Turkey as a NATO ally, I think those relations are pretty transparent.
I think we saw some use of F-16s in previous engagement, but I don't know about now.
I'm not familiar with that. Let me try to confirm that. I think that I've never heard. I think the piece with Turkey and its involvement, as you say, they have a very close relationship. And I think there are a few elements that are important here. One is the relationship to Armenia. We're very hopeful that we'll see some opening because Armenia is essentially landlocked, right? Its routes out have to go to the west, have to go through Georgia or Turkey. And so for Turkey to begin opening those apertures, I think is critical for Armenia's future. So we spend a great deal of time discussing that. Now, the relationship with Azerbaijan, I think there are a couple of elements, and I think the government of Turkey is very well able to speak for itself, but I'll say two things that matter. One is this economic corridor that we're discussing is a road or rail route that would run from really from Central Asia through Azerbaijan and Armenia and then to Turkey. So it's a clear Turkish economic interest to be the end point for this route. And that was an element that was not present in previous peace talks, and we just want to be sure that it's kept central to everyone's calculations. And then finally, to the point that the ranking member and I were discussing, one of the hardest issues for a leader is to know when the moment is to strike a deal rather than to wait for the deal to get better. And that's, to some extent, an objective calculation, but more often it also depends on your friends telling you when enough is enough. And so having a clear communication with Turkey and a constructive involvement by Turkey in these discussions is incredibly helpful, because President Aliyev will want to know that he's not alone making this decision, but that he's with a longtime partner of his own. And I think that's a role that Turkey can uniquely play.
Doctor?
I would just add to that the point about the value of including Armenia in this middle corridor route. Ambassador spoke about some of that. USAID has actually worked with the government of Armenia on doing some analytical work and studies of those routes. And if you may have seen recently at the Silk Road Forum in Tbilisi, Prime Minister Pashinyan went and put up a big map about all the different trade routes that Armenia would like to see to deal with this issue of being landlocked that was discussed earlier. So we very much see, opening up routes, opening up economies, opening up energy cooperation as a key dividend of peace, and that's one of the things that we're trying to help with from the USAID side to promote peace. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Now you're back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman, Mr. Wilson, is recognized.
Thank you very much, Chairman Darrell Issa. And indeed, thank both of you for your service. It's so important, more so than ever in our country. And then, Secretary O'Brien, I want this to be perceived as a compliment, but you clearly are the winner of the Speaker Mike Johnson contest, a lookalike contest, okay? So as we proceed, with this in mind, the United States has active and important partnerships.
Are you going to let the gentleman respond to that?
Well, hey, it's all good. Here.
I should be so lucky, Representative
No.
Wilson.
Hey, those glasses give it away right away, okay? The United States has an active and important partnership with both Armenia and Azerbaijan, very significant countries for Caspian Sea and Black Sea prosperity and stability. Armenian Americans and Azerbaijani Americans are very successful, and they have been so appreciated in business and community activities, and leaders all across America. Every part of America has people who we cherish, our Armenian and Azerbaijani Americans. What is the path forward in working with both countries, where the importance of maintaining our strong relationships with both?
I'll let Dr. Sokolowski talk to many of the ways we're trying to improve governmental capacity in both countries. But I'll just say you are right that we have important relations with both countries. And that's why the way we are managing this is that we want to see Armenia improve the options it has to represent its people. And we want to work with Azerbaijan as it makes its choices so that human rights there improve, something we comment on regularly, but that our relationship can get back to normal. So as just one example, again, we talk about this transit corridor. There is business to be done in this region. It will add to the prosperity, and we think the reform efforts across the region. So we would love to see this transit corridor happen with the consent and involvement of both states. An attempt to do it unilaterally or with the help of Iran would not be acceptable. And so we're painting a future of how we can grow closer and work more together that way.
Hey, we look forward to backing you up in every way. Additionally, how would the withholding of Section 907 waiver and stopping security assistance to Azerbaijan impact other national security goals, such as countering the Iranian smuggling operations?
So we feel that where the program is in place now, absorbing previous years, that our security remains protected by where we are with the program. We want to make clear it'd be good to move to a new phase, but that we can't do until we see progress on the peace side.
And it's so important to me that we counter the axis of evil, being the regime in Tehran, the Chinese Communist Party, war criminal Putin, and all of this fits together. And it's to the benefit of the people of Azerbaijan and Armenia that indeed the dictators with rule of gun do not prevail over democracies with rule of law, and we need to be sticking together. Additional to that, Mr. Secretary, Putin has 3,000 soldiers at a military base in Armenia, which is startling, and they claim that they have a right to be there through 2044, but that's not clear. And so what can be done to assist the people of Armenia to request Putin to take his troops home?
I think I agree with both the statements you just made. I think the answer to both is the same. Our involvement in concluding a peace agreement between these countries is the way that each can find a way forward. The Russian troops are present under, at the moment, it's a 5-year initial term following the 2020 peace agreement. If there's an alternative for the countries, then there'll be no role for these Russian peacekeepers. I mean, they've already failed as peacekeepers. And so the best approach is to give both these countries the alternative of working with us and the West.
And I know that we're here in regard to Nagorno-Karabakh, but I was grateful for Congresswoman Titus bringing up Turkey, our NATO ally. Somehow we've got to have them understand how important they are to world security, and we need to have rapprochement in every way that we can. So, hey, what I'm just telling you, you need to be a miracle worker. Thank you very much.
Gentleman yields back. We recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Costa.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the chairman of the subcommittee and the ranking member for holding this hearing. I think it's timely and important. We had actually requested this over a month ago, and I'm glad we finally are here. We've also followed up with a bipartisan letter on a number of actions that I would like to bring to the attention of the State Department and follow up. I don't think we've gotten answers to those yet. Let me begin, first of all, though, and I concur with the earlier point that was made with Dr. Iabaldo, who's being held captive. I think we need to stay on top of that and obviously request his release. It's the humanitarian thing to do. But I want to also ask you, we're trying to deal with this supplemental package, we hope, after Thanksgiving, that would provide funding not only for Ukraine, which is critical, but also for Israel and the challenges in Gaza. And humanitarian aid is a part of that component, and I would hope that the State Department's looking, when we hopefully come together with that bipartisan package in December, that a segment of that bipartisan, that supplemental would provide humanitarian support for Armenia, given the over 100,000 refugees that they're dealing with and some of the other issues. Is that the intention of the State Department?
I can take a first stab at it. Thank you very much for the question, Representative Costa. What I can reiterate is that in our conversations with the government of Armenia, they continue to identify needs that they
Yes, they have, and they've been
Yes,
providing
yes,
members
right.
of Congress with those needs. I assume they've been providing you with those needs as well.
Yes, correct. And we're in conversations with them on trying to meet those within existing resources that we have. They are handling those to the extent that they can, but yes, I can confirm that they are asking for
I mean, they've made a
additional
6-month
support.
commitment to these refugees for housing, for medical assistance, and for economic relocation. Let me move on. I've been listening to this conversation, and maybe I'm misinformed. I don't see the peace process as going nearly as well as some of the description I've just heard. The meeting in Granada, Spain, the last 2 meetings, Azerbaijan's refused to go. I don't know how you describe that as being positive. And Armenia, I know, is very concerned that the mediators would be Turkey and Russia. I mean, Russia did absolutely nothing but allow the Azerbaijan to do the ethnic cleansing. It was ethnic cleansing that happened with the removal of these Armenians from their historic homeland in Nagorno-Karabakh. I mean, to call it something else These folks did not want to leave, and the corridor, I'm not convinced that they have access to go back to their homes. I'm hearing something entirely different. You care to comment?
Yeah, sorry.
Don't just let my time run out, please.
No,
Don't let
I-
bells and whistles bother you either. We ignore them too.
Apologize. So I think, look, you know this situation well.
Yes.
And I've talked
I
about,
represent a significant Armenian community, the land of William Saroyan.
and so what I'd say on the peace process is what I have said throughout, is I think the parties are engaging with each other directly. They do occasionally use mediators. Sometimes they argue about which the mediators should be, but they're in direct bilateral contact, assisted by us, assisted by the Europeans.
Well, they certainly don't trust Turkey, and they shouldn't. And Russia's track record now, when you include Ukraine, it's not one that I would rely on.
I don't think they're relying on those people. I think this comes down to whether they can look each other in the eye and say yes. And so I wouldn't worry about sort of the different mediation efforts. I think this is fundamentally about whether the two leaders say, we want to be in partnership working on this together going forward. And we're doing what we can to make clear the benefits of that happening.
Well, my understanding is the Armenian leader is showing courage. He's in a tenuous situation, and we need to do everything we can to provide support. And the corridor that you talk about, I think, from what I hear, the Armenians are concerned and feel threatened by that corridor and what it might imply for another grabbing of land by Azerbaijan once it's established, and what kind of role they would play, or any benefits that they could, or whether or not they could hold Azerbaijan to an agreement that they would benefit from that corridor that would be in portion on Armenian land.
But those are problems to be solved, Representative. Currently, that land is controlled by Russian peacekeepers. If we create an alternative that can be negotiated with Armenia, we're in a fundamentally different place. That's where the Prime Minister says he wants to be.
Yeah, well, my time's expired, Mr. Chairman, but I think that Russian peacekeepers is a bit of an oxymoron.
On that note, the gentleman yields back. I now recognize myself to agree with the gentleman that if you shake hands with a Russian, you lose fingers. Some years ago, I was in Baku for the celebration of the pipeline completion through there, and there were 8 heads of state. Weirdly enough, I was the highest-ranking American, which is a little questionable that how engaged we were. And that tells me, to a certain extent, that it's not new that we say we're engaged, but we then leave it to proxies, and proxies like Turkey and Russia. So following up on the gentleman from California's statement, what are you prepared to do, Ambassador, to create carrot and stick to move this agenda? Are you willing to add sanctions for noncompliance? And are you willing to, you said available resources, would you delineate some of the resources you believe you have that could help Armenia be in a position to want to have a settlement and to trust in the settlement?
It is a question we're working on. As I said, we're looking at a matter of weeks to a few months. So these are all questions we're developing answers to.
You're so close. Can't you give us a hint?
Well, perhaps not always in this forum, but I will say there are 2 serious questions also that we're trying to sort through. One is the relationship with the European Union. So President von der Leyen has said publicly that she intends to have a meeting with the U.S. and with Armenia on a way to bring Armenia closer to our communities. I discussed this with the Prime Minister just a few days ago, and we're developing what that would look like. And obviously, given the proximity, the offer the European Union could make in terms of trade preferences, economic alignment, and access to the single market is incredibly important. We can assist in that, and that's just another piece, and Dr. Sokolowski can talk about that. The feasibility studies on this transit corridor are actually been funded by AID. So we're in the middle of seeing what kind of economic future there may be. There may also be additional items that we and the Europeans can bring to bear on security. France has just announced some significant contributions to Armenia's security. And yes, we are looking at all the tools we have. I'm not going to preview any sanctions decisions, but that's certainly a tool in our toolkit. And
well, let me just follow up on that. You're not previewing them, but are you committing to a willingness to use them if other methods don't work?
yes.
Thank you. Armenia is obviously eligible for a lot of USAID support. You mentioned those studies that were done under USAID. Has the TDA, the Trade Development Agency, been in there? And if not, wouldn't they benefit by having the feasibility that would include U.S. alternatives to Belt and Road?
So I'll start with that, and I think this keys into your, so thank you for the question, Representative Issa. This keys into the conversation that you were just having with the ambassador with regard to broader support for Armenia. We are engaged with the government of Armenia in a number of different areas to help them increase their resilience and give them options so that they're not so dependent on previous relationships with Russia that go back to the Soviet period. And these are engagements on areas related to trade, energy and critical infrastructure, information systems, a whole range of things, even including agriculture, and that's what I wanted to get to. So we worked with our colleagues at the Department of State and with the USDA to bring in folks from the USDA to start to work with the government of Armenia on what it can do on lessening its dependence on Russian grain and flour. And so that, per your point about TDA, we see this as a moment where it really has to be a whole-of-government effort, looking across all of our abilities to see what we can bring in response to what the government of Armenia is signaling its needs are. So I think that's a great point, and we're at a moment where we're looking more broadly than we have in the past about which is the best U.S. government partner to respond to government of Armenia needs.
Well, in my remaining moments, I'm going to follow up on that, Doctor. The Armenian government, its ability to know what it needs versus a willingness for us to lean into a program suggestions. If you were to balance the two of them without any disrespect to the government, wouldn't you balance it in favor of we need to lean in?
Thank you for that question, because it's a great question that goes to the core of what we do in our development relationships with our partners. And it really is a conversation. They will come into a conversation saying, we need these 10 things. And in the midst of a conversation, we can say, well, what about this 11th thing? Or the thing that you're suggesting, have you thought about this experience from this other country that might be useful? So I think you're absolutely right that we shouldn't just say, okay, here's what you're saying, and that's exactly what it is. It's a conversation in which we can say, here's where we think we can help you, here's where other different parts of the U.S. government or even other donors or other organizations could be of support.
Thank you. And my time has expired. Pursuant to the committee rules, I now recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Lawler.
Thank you, Chairman. Administrations here in the U.S. have long justified sending military assistance to Azerbaijan on the basis of its supposed utility in the containment of Russia and Iran. Yet Azerbaijan has extensive energy ties with both. Sanctioned Russian and Iranian companies own significant shares in Azerbaijan's gas fields exporting energy to Europe, and Azerbaijan has recently signed lucrative energy deals with both countries. Yes or no, is the administration aware of Azerbaijan's energy ties with Russia and Iran?
Yes.
Do you believe this behavior is consistent with our regional interests?
No, and we try to encourage diversification of Azerbaijan's ties for that reason.
So I recently introduced a sanctions bill on Iranian petroleum, which passed through the House, the SHIP Act. And the reason being that obviously the United States has sanctions on Iranian petroleum, But frankly, the administration was not enforcing secondary sanctions on the purchasers. You look at China, they are the largest purchaser of Iranian petroleum. Iranian petroleum sales are up 59% since this administration took office. So when you look at what is happening around the globe and the relationship between China, Russia, Iran, and what they are doing to undermine the United States and our allies and our interests around the globe, why would we not try to hold Azerbaijan accountable for the arrangements that they have with both Russia and Iran when it comes to energy?
Well, at the risk of separating two subjects you just merged, I think if our concerns with Iran, we should take focus on Iran. And I had some involvement. I mean, we sanctioned a number of Iranian companies that were involved in military support to Russia and a number of companies involved in the Iranian trade. The oil trade, the difficulty we were encountering with both Russia and Iran was the growth of this ghost fleet and, say, ghost services industries. So the way in which we traditionally restrict oil sales is to go after the insurance crew providers, you know, all of those service entities, and ultimately the ships that carried the oil depended on those services, so they would tend to come into compliance. What we've seen in the last few years is the growth of 500 or more tankers that are carrying oil completely outside the service industry.
Which is why I introduced the SHIP Act.
Well, and so what we also are doing, though, is trying to re-regulate these ships because it's a great danger to navigation as well as to our sanctions programs. So we've issued the first steps along that way. I think you saw some initial sanctions come out in the last package, as well as an advisory that's increasing the due diligence requirements of those who would sell the ships or buy them back and otherwise service them. And we're now engaged with the ports to which these ships go because to recognize the dangers and increase their regulation of them as well. So there are a couple different ways of slicing the cake here, but we're trying to get at the same problem with the tools that we have available to us.
President Biden recently noted that when autocrats don't, quote, pay a price for their aggression, unquote, it only emboldens their behavior. What has the Biden administration done to ensure Azerbaijan pays a price for its aggression?
So as I mentioned, we've made clear to them that there's no business as usual. We've suspended high-level contacts and on a variety of topics, and we have not and don't anticipate submitting a waiver on 907. The real question is, so is that enough? And President Aliyev has traditionally tried to balance his ties to the regional players, Russia, Iran particularly, Central Asia, as well as to the West. And I think he's reaching a point, in my analysis, that if he makes peace, he has the opportunity to become more prosperous and to be in a stable area where there are counterweights to Russia and Iran. If he fails to make peace, he's really saying that in the future, I want to be beholden to Russia and Iran at a time when those two powers are getting much closer to one another than they are to him. And that puts him in the position of being very much the odd man out in a three-way game. And I think that's not where he should want to head. So we're trying to provide him with the alternative of a better future.
Thank you. Yield back.
The gentleman yields back. We now recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Schneider.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the witnesses. From December of last year to September of this year, Azerbaijan blockaded the Lachin corridor, the only connection between Armenia proper and the ethnic enclave of Nagorno-Karabakh or Artsakh. Many of us here in Congress sent letter after letter after letter and supported resolution after resolution to exert pressure and relieve the humanitarian situation in Nagorno-Karabakh, which had been exacerbated since the 2020 war. It looks like we failed. During September 1920, Azerbaijan launched an offensive that led to the local Armenian authorities agreeing to a ceasefire. Within 10 days of that ceasefire, the ethnic Armenian population of the enclave went from 120,000 to 100,000, with locals leaving in fear or forcibly being expelled. Approximately 300 people died, 220 of them in a fuel depot explosion about which we don't yet know enough of the details. dozens remain missing. I want the people who chant ceasefire now around the world not to forget Nagorno-Karabakh. That ceasefire ended in an ethnic cleansing, not a multi-ethnic harmony. American relations with Azerbaijan are inherently complicated. Azerbaijan shares our skepticism of Russia and Iran, and the country supports our ally Israel. We can't ignore the strategic opportunities and shared priorities with Azerbaijan. But we must also be firm advocates for our values and the principles of human rights. The tightening of the stranglehold around Nagorno-Karabakh over the years until the ethnic Armenian population was forced to leave was not just about counterterrorism, and it was not just about geopolitics. When we reflect on how this could have possibly happened, I want to share a story that took place in Hungary in 2004. Gergen Magarian, a lieutenant in the Armenian army, was in Budapest, participating in a 3-month English course as part of NATO's Partnership for Peace program. He was sleeping in his room around 5 a.m. when Gergen was axed, hacked to death by an Azerbaijani lieutenant, Ramil Safarov, a fellow participant in the very same program. Gergen received 16 blows to his face, and his head was nearly separated from his body. Safarov was convicted of murder and sentenced to life by a Hungarian court in 2006. Sadly, in 2012, 2 years into Viktor Orban's premiership, Safarov was extradited to Azerbaijan. The killer was greeted as a hero and pardoned by President Aliyev. The Defense Ministry promoted him to the rank of major and furnished him with an apartment and back pay. So this story leads me to ask you, Ambassador O'Brien, what should be our takeaway from what happened in 2004 through 2012? How should we think of the possibilities of peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan in this context?
I think, Representative, that's a reprehensible set of events. Peace is always made between adversaries, and to see any successful peace through to its conclusion, there needs to be accountability for crimes, but there also needs to be some measure of setting a new path going forward. And what lies before us now is whether that's possible in this case, and that lies with the parties. We are creating a path for them to take and incentives for them to go there. We have to do this in a way that is consistent with our rights. And if I may, just a tiny digression, Representative Costa, you mentioned Dr. Ibadolu. We maintain sort of constant vigilance on this and insist on his fair treatment. We would like to see him released. We'll continue to urge that. And I think we'll do the same on any other human rights issue that comes across in our relationship with Azerbaijan. So we do that in a way that's consistent with our values. And what we are looking for now is a peace agreement that reflects the interests of the people of Armenia, and we believe those of Azerbaijan, in developing stronger relationships with the vibrant economies to their west, rather than with the autocracies to their north and south.
Great, thank you. My time is about expired. Thank you for mentioning Dr. Ibadoglu, and I will mention his son, Eamon, is here as well today.
The gentleman yields back. And I want to take a moment to personally thank our witnesses for their candor. It was a very effective dialogue because of your willingness to answer fully the questions of the committee. If there are no further questions from the members, again, I thank our witnesses, and the subcommittee may have additional written questions for the witnesses, and we would ask that you respond in writing if you agree. Thank you. The gentleman.
I'd just like to raise a point. One of the other things that we mentioned in the letter that we sent, and of course with the year approaching, it may have to be the following year, but I think the subcommittee should consider taking a CODEL to Armenia and to meet with the officials there. I think
it's noted. Hopefully the ambassador will send us the appropriate invitation.
Thank you.
We'd welcome it.
Thank you.
Let us organize that. And we'll look for your letter, too.
Thank you. We look forward to that. Pursuant to the committee rules, all members may have 5 days to submit statements, questions, and extraneous materials for the record, subject to length limitations. Without objection, the subcommittee, as a result, is adjourned.